Okay, we're going to tie a fly taken from the Hatch Guide for New England Streams, a book by Tom Ames Jr. This is a Kennebago Muddler developed by Mike Arsenault, and I believe I read that he developed this fly when he was only 10. We're going to tie it in olive. Tom Ames suggests using the olive-bodied, olive-tied fly as a dragonfly imitation. He also mentions that tied with the natural deer body hair, it makes a good grasshopper imitation, and I've swung it as a streamer quite a few times and done quite well with it too. Now I started the thread on the hook, and I started it about a third of the way back from the eye to allow room for our spun deer head, and make a couple wraps here and get in position to put the tail on this fly. The tail is lemon wood duck flank, and we want these barred feathers that were over here on the right hand side to have better barring and have a little more body to the feather fiber itself. We'll just peel some of that off the stem and cut away the material that came off with the hackle barbels. With that cut away, I'll just place this against the hook shank and just fold those over. See, I placed the dull side against the hook shank and just folded it down so the good coloration is showing to the outside. And now I'll measure this for length against the gap of the hook. I want about a gap length sticking out over the back. So I place that where I think it's going to be the correct length. Do a quick pinch on this. And then I'll hold these fibers right up on top of the hook as I wrap to the rear of the hook, trapping them in place. Now I wrap back up to the front, and with this material that's out here, watch, I wrap and pull, soft wrap and pull, soft wrap and pull. As long as you make a soft wrap and pull, you're okay. But if I wrap with tension, see how it pulls the material down around the side? Let me back up here a few wraps. Get that stuff back up on the top. Now watch, soft wrap and then pull. Soft wrap and then pull. It gives me good tension on the thread. The material is bound well, but it allows me to wrap forward without having to hold that material. And by not wrapping with tight tension as I go over the material, rather applying the tension later, I'm able to wrap and not have to hold that material up on top of the hook. Our body is going to be gold tinsel. I'm using size 14 tinsel here. Just take and trap this against the side of the hook. Now I'm going to place this with the gold side of the tinsel against the hook. And when I start wrapping, the tinsel will fold over and the gold will be exposed, and gold is what we want for color of our body. I'm going to throw a whip finish knot in here and hang this bobbin out over the cradle. You don't have to throw a whip finish knot in, but it's a lot safer thing to do. You don't have the thread slipping and releasing your material anywhere near as often if you just throw that quick half hitch or whip finish knot in there. Now with that out there, I'll roll this over so it's easy to grab the tinsel and start wrapping, and you watch, it'll roll over. See how it's rolled? Now the silver is against the shank. And I just continue to wrap, putting these wraps edge to edge and wrap all the way to the bend. And once I get to the bend down here, I just start wrapping back up in the opposite direction. Any gaps that I may have left hopefully will be covered with this return wrap. Once I get back up here, I just remove my thread from the cradle, come up and trap this tinsel, wrap in front of it, and trim it off. I'm going to take a couple wraps back onto the tinsel, as you can see, because I want a flat base to set my underwing on, and the underwing is squirrel tail, gray squirrel tail. I don't need very much of this, just a few fibers. I got plenty of length, so I'll go ahead and trim that off. I wanted to check that against the length of the shank, make sure I had long enough fibers. Putting these hair fibers in a stacker right now to get the tips and ends even. And they are, so I'll bring this in, measure against the shank for my proper length. A few more fibers in there than I need, I'll thin that out some. Again, check my length. And I'm going to use the turn and look technique where I turn and I'm looking right down on my hook as I do this pinch. And I can see if that material stays in place properly, stays right up on top of the hook shank. And it did. So I'll make sure I make a couple extra wraps here to secure it. Pull this up and make one wrap underneath. And then a wrap over the top of this squirrel tail, because this stuff is notoriously slippery. And a wrap underneath and then a wrap over like that helps to lock it in. Now that it's locked in, I'll trim these butt sections off. And we can get ready for the actual wing. Now, as we used wood duck flank for the tail, we'll use it for the wing as well. You see the flank feather here, I've got one that's balanced as the equal amount of material on both sides of the stem. And I've trimmed off all of the stuff we're not going to use, and I'll size this against it. See, it's a nice even triangular piece. Having prepared one, I'll prepare a second one. Got two of these that are pretty well matched. Roll these over, and I'll place the fire one first by just rolling the vise over and letting the back side of the hook become the front. I tell people all the time the great thing about rotary fly tying is there is no such thing as the back side of the hook. You just roll it over and place your material, and then roll over and place your material on the other side, and you're always working right there in front of you instead of on the back side guessing whether or not the material is placed properly. So I'll bring this other feather in, match up the ends so that it's relatively even. Just pinch this against the side, make a few wraps on it, and I can now rotate and check, see if I've got nice even placement. I do. The tips are even, the tops touch together. Everything looks okay on that. I'm pretty happy with the placement of those wings, so I'm just going to trim these stems off. And as with a regular muddler, this does have a deer body hair skirt that sticks to the rear that you put on before you spin the head. And I'm trying to make a nice smooth underbody here so that when I put this skirt on, I've got something smooth to tie to and work with. Before I start that, I want to go ahead and put this knot in, because if I break my thread while I'm putting the skirt on or spinning the deer hair, it won't unravel back beyond this point. Now here's a clump of deer body hair. Clean all the butt fibers out and any underfur that's in there that's loose. You can see the size of the clump I got here. I kind of twist this up so you can see how big the clump is or isn't. And that's just about the right amount as far as I'm concerned. And to get this on, I don't want to spin this. I want this skirt to be a 360-degree skirt, and I don't want to spin the hair. And to get it so all the way around like that, what I do is I just slide this in and make sure that the hook eye stays in the middle of the clump. Slide it back so that the length is what I want. It's back there about by the bend of the hook. I know it completely envelops the hook. And I'll just pinch this material, get it nice and tight, make a soft wrap around it and pull it tight, not allowing it to spin. I'm going to keep it pinched between my left thumb and forefinger. Now I cinch up on this, you can see it start to flare. I'm not letting it roll at all because I don't want it to knock my wing out of alignment. Another good tight pull on that. Push some of this material back, and then I'll see if I can wrap forward through these butt fibers. Of course, some of these fibers always manage to fight with you, but we'll work around that. I'll keep stroking back and pulling my thread to the front, trying to get in front of that clump of hair. And trap those down. I'm not too worried about them because I can cut them out now. Trim those up, stroke this stuff to the rear, and smooth that all up so that we can spin the next clump of hair on here. Often you'll hear people say you can't spin on anything but a bare shank, but you're going to see proof that that's not truly the case. We're about to spin some on here. I've cut some more deer body hair. This is good hollow deer body hair, not bucktail, but definitely body hair. I've cut a clump here. I've cut these short. I'm going to cut them short here. I don't really need those tips on there, and it's easier to handle this smaller, shorter clump than the long clumps with the tips on them. I'll set this in place and take a couple of wraps around it, just loose wraps, not particularly tight. Cinch that down a little, one more and pull. And now I can let go of everything and just spin and rotate, and you see how that indeed did spin around the shank right on that thread base that we had underneath it. Do the same thing. I'll stroke these fibers back and I'll wiggle wrap to get through to the front. Push that hair back and pack it a little bit. Got plenty of room for another clump out there. Here's another clump that I've prepared. I'm going to cut this even shorter, so I'm really spinning a very small, short clump of hair. It just makes it easier when you trim later, if you can handle and spin these little short clumps like this. Make a wrap around, cinch that up a little bit, make a second wrap, and pull and wrap. Often you can unwrap and wrap, and it helps tighten. And stroke and wiggle wrap to the front, stroke to the rear, and wiggle wrap your thread to the front. And there, plenty of room for the whip finish knot. Okay, and if one knot is good, two is better. I'll throw a second one in here. Cut that off and we can get to trimming the head. Now to trim the head, any tips that are on there are part of the skirt. So I'll just stroke all these butt sections back. I'll try to be sure not to get any tip fibers in there that are sticking out as part of my skirt. And you can see with the short pieces I've spun, the head is already pre-trimmed to some degree. So again, I'll stroke these forward, standing them up, being careful to just get the butt sections, not any of the tip. You can see where I started wrapping or putting the skirt on. I was a little bit away from the base of my wings, and that kind of gives me a dividing point to go back and work with here as I stroke those fibers. Well, as I cut this down, you'll see a little better what I'm talking about. I trim these up, and you're beginning to be able to see there is a little bit of thread exposed behind the head, but when I get done trimming this and push this all to the rear, it'll cover those right up, and it makes it a lot easier to move those fibers forward and trim if you do have that little bit of space right behind the head. Now we're going to speed this up a little bit. I would normally take this out of the vise. I often take these out and cut this head with a single-edged razor blade as opposed to using scissors. Razor blades do a good job at this. There's no particular shape for this head. You can kind of shape it to what you like, and since how you're tying the fly, you can do it the way you want. I like kind of a bullet-shaped head. I'd make it more of a blunt head if I were tying this in natural deer body hair color for a grasshopper imitation. A couple of more clips to finish that up. You can see all the thread that was behind the head has disappeared. And I think that's it. There you have it. There's a Kennebago Muddler taken from Hatch Guides for New England Streams, tied using rotary fly tying techniques.